Another season of offensive improvement for Joel Eriksson Ek and a lot of chaos on his line around him. So what can we expect for 2023-2024? We discuss on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild. Your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. If this is your first time tuning into Locked on Wild, we're glad to have you along. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any of our new episodes throughout the course of the week. Today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. You can go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL or enter promo code LockedOnNHL for a free white tech hat with any order. Word of warning, when you put your Bird Dogs on, promise you, you're not going to want to take them off. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we preview the 2023-2024 season for Joel Eriksson Ek. We'll look at how he continued his improvement year by year. We'll also look at a little bit of the behind the scenes as to what led to maybe a dip in defensive numbers for Joel Eriksson Ek this year. And we'll take a look at what we need from Jeek here this season. So another season, another round of improvement for Joel Eriksson Ek as he just continues to put himself into a category of a vital player to the success of this Minnesota Wild franchise. We had a career high in points this past season with 61, 23 goals in 78 games, but then 38 assists. So the 61 points, 44 penalty minutes for Eriksson Ek this season. Saw a little bit of a rise there, but the real improvement was on the power play. Same number of power play goals as he had last season with 12, but 11 power play assists. So 23 total power play points for Eriksson Ek this past season. His shooting numbers dipped to 9.3%, but saw a career high in minutes played. Face-off percentage again went up a couple of percentage points to 49.4%. 55 blocks, a career high. 119 hits, 44 takeaways, 14 giveaways. He finished 9th in the Selke Trophy voting as well this season. And so you look at all of these areas of improvement for Eriksson Ek, and it seemed like he was in position to add goals to his list of areas that he improved, but then got hurt in the final few games of the season. But I have to feel like some of that wasn't necessarily his fault. I know he did finish 9th in the Selke voting, but a little bit of a dip in defensive numbers as well, which also I don't think was entirely his doing. Just was on some line combinations that really torpedoed in the early part of the season. We saw the fall of the Grief line. We saw the breaking up of the Grief line, and the numbers for said Grief line that was just a huge weapon for this team 2 years ago. They were unplayable at the final stages. And I will also throw this at you. So in terms of goals for, goals against, the Marcus Foligno, Joel Eriksson Ek, Jordan Greenway combination, which was the second high, or was the most minutes that Eriksson Ek was on a line this season. They scored 7 goals in 23 games. They gave up 9 goals. The Corsi numbers, not great. The expected goals against at 5.63 in those 23 games. And then you throw in the fact as well that at one point, Marcus Foligno, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Tyson Jost were on a line together, and that line got outscored 4-1 as well. And so you put those two line combinations together, and it's 8 goals for, it's 13 goals against. And that's not all. There were some other line combinations that Eriksson Ek was a part of that just were not really weren't that good. I mean, the metrics were good, but in terms of scoring, just didn't have a lot of it. At one point, we had Marcus Foligno, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Ryan Reeves for a 3-game span. And the Corsi numbers for that trio was good, but they did not score a goal, and they ended up giving up a goal themselves. We had Marcus Foligno, Joel Eriksson Ek, Ryan Hartman. That line, no scoring, and the Corsi numbers there, not great. You had Kirill Kaprizov, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Matt Zuccarello for a 4-game span. That line got outscored 1-0, and the Corsi numbers there were really not good. You had Jordan Greenway, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Brandon Duhaime. That line got outscored, and the Corsi numbers there under 50%. So you have a lot of different line combinations that were being tried while players were out of the lineup, and after the grief line ended up finally being put out to pasture. And there were a lot of combinations that didn't really work in the early part of the season, but kept trying to find some things. Eriksson Ek eventually teamed up with Matt Boldy, and those two really got some good chemistry together. Enter Marcus Johansson into the combination, and that was the line combo that really started to take off. Second most minutes for Joel Eriksson Ek in a combination. They played 17 games together, outscored their opponents 14-4. Corsi numbers over 50%, and expected goals for of 5.46 from that trio. So I think the story here is that the early part of the season was a mess, chaos all over the place, defense just scrambling, trying to find answers. But at the end of the season, the Wild found a trio that worked, and it led to Joel Eriksson Ek being able to kind of regain some of that as a defensive combination that, even with Marcus Johansson on that line, they did some pretty good things over that span that they were put together. So that gives you some promise for this year. Now, another thing to factor in as well is we really know from a power play and a penalty kill perspective, we know that Joel Eriksson Ek is a huge critical fixture of both of those special teams units as well. Power play wise, he's the net front guy. We saw that lead to a tied for career high in goals on the power play. And so being able to be that guy, that net front presence with players that are capable of shooting from other areas of the zone and allowing him to really focus on rebounds and deflections, I think that will help the offensive numbers this year, especially in even strength, as well as on the power play. So it was still a good season for Eriksson Ek. Obviously, in the postseason, tried to get himself into playing shape. It did not work out. 19 seconds, and just was not able to have any sort of strength on that broken leg. And so unfortunate there, really missed him in the postseason. And so the hope is that he is able to be fully ready to rock once the season rolls around here in a couple of months. Now, we are going to take a look at a few other Eriksson Ek factors here throughout the course of today's show. We'll look at statistically what we can expect from Eriksson Ek for this season, and we'll take a look at whether or not he could potentially rank higher in Selke voting now that a certain Patrice Bergeron has retired. Let's be honest, the award will probably be named for him within the next couple of years. And so we'll see where Eriksson Ek could potentially rank in the Bergeron Trophy voting. All that and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Wild. Attention, athletic individuals. If you're a fan of your shorts and your look in the summer, but just don't like the way that they feel, Bird Dogs is here to help. Bird Dogs can give you a great look and a cool feel with your shorts. Their stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. They do everything that those other brand names such as Lululemon do, but they fit way better. And they use anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL right now or enter promo code LockedOnNHL for a free white tech hat with your order. So whether you order 1 pair, 2 pairs, 10 pairs, make sure you head to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL or promo code LockedOnNHL for a free white tech hat. Word of warning, when you put your Bird Dogs on, promise you, you're not going to want to take them off. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild, once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you check out our special second episode today with Jesse Pierce. We've got 2 episodes for you today, so make sure that you check both of them out as we continue to navigate you through the offseason towards the start of the season coming up in October. So for Joel Eriksson Ek, what can we expect from him from a stats perspective here this season? Well, first off, looking at the Selke Trophy voting, the Frank J. Selke Trophy, with Patrice Bergeron retiring, the guy who ran away with the voting this year, receiving 97% of the total votes. It opens up the opportunity that a guy like Joel Eriksson Ek could potentially work his way into the conversation for the award. Nico Hischier of the Devils finished second with 800 votes, and beyond that, it was just, there was really nobody even close. Mitch Marner was third. He had 480 total votes. Then Jordan Staal, Anze Kopitar, Mikhail Backlund, Elias Pettersson, and Alexander Barkov were the top 8. And then Joel Eriksson Ek had 128 votes this season. 4 second place, 10 third place, and 8 fourth place, then 26 fifth place votes. But let's consider this. It was not as good of a defensive season for Eriksson Ek as it's been in previous years. And you go back 2 years ago, 2 years before that, I should say, where he finished 4th in the Selke Trophy voting, which was before he had really kind of established himself as a defensive forward, defensive center in the league. He was behind guys like Barkov, Bergeron, and Mark Stone as well. So I got to feel like there is a better chance for him to be able to finish higher up in the voting with guys like Matt Boldy, who we've seen add a little bit more to the defensive side of his game, to where now you've got 2 guys that are, I would say, plus defenders. Boldy is more, he's moving towards the plus side, but Joel Eriksson Ek is definitely in that plus side category. And with Marcus Johansson, you know, he brings the speed that I think he can help out in that capacity, but you're not needing him to do as much on defense. He's helping out with the offense, to say the least, with the speed that he brings. But I feel like we could see Joel Eriksson Ek in the next few seasons get more love for his defense that he brings. Now, from a statistical category, let's just run through the categories and see where we think he can end up this season. So had 23 goals this past year in 78 games. And I am going to go off of what we saw after the pairing of Joel Eriksson Ek, Matt Boldy, and Marcus Johansson, where Eriksson Ek had just a really, really good month of March from a points category. He had 12 points in the month of March, 2 goals and 10 assists. That coincided with Matt Boldy going nuts and having 12 goals in March. And so there were a lot of setup opportunities for Eriksson Ek there, maybe not so much goals. But my main point being is that if you get that combination of, as we've talked about this week, if you get that combination of Boldy, Eriksson Ek, and Johansson going right off the bat, there are going to be better opportunities for those guys throughout the course of the season. They may not come close to that 0.7 goals per game, or I think it was where it was 14 goals in 17 games. They may not be able to extrapolate that over the course of a full season. They can probably come close, but my main point being is that I think we see Eriksson Ek be able to leap over that 23 goal mark. I think we could see him become somewhere around a 25 to 30 goal scorer next season and just have that kind of be his benchmark because of how important he is on the power play. But I think we see the even strength goal numbers come up for him. And so I'm going to say over on goals. I think we could get a slight bump in assists, but I feel like 35 to 45 assists for Eriksson Ek as a guy who camps in front of the net mostly and tries to grab rebounds and deflect shots. I feel like 35 to 45 assists is a pretty solid spot for him to be in, especially as a center, especially as a non-top line center. So if you get 30 goals, if you get 35 to 45 assists, and you get a guy who is a 65 to 75 point player with the value that he brings on defense, you're talking about a guy who is worth well above what he is being paid, and is another example of Bill Guerin signing guys on the early side so that then you really maximize the years on that deal, that you end up getting a ton of value based off of a small amount of AAV on the salary cap. And Eriksson Ek, I think it's $5.8 million. It's somewhere in that 5 range. But if he ends up having 30 goals this year, 65, 70 points, that's just absurd value for what he's getting paid. And I don't see a reason in which I don't see a way in which he doesn't hit those marks again here this season. Now, penalty minutes, career high for Eriksson Ek, who's way more in the 20 penalty minutes per season range as opposed to the 40. But again, I'm going to look at least for some of it, a guy trying to compensate for teammates that are not really helping him out. I mean, Jordan Greenway, before he was traded, was just brutal. And I don't know what it was, if it was just that he wasn't feeling like he fit or what the deal was with Greenway, but it did not work at all. And then Marcus Foligno looking like he lost a step. Tyson Jost early in the season. Just a lot of line mates that just were not able to do the things that they needed to do, which led to Eriksson Ek trying to compensate to make up for some of those shortcomings. And so if he can get back to that 20-ish range in penalties, you think about it then, if most of those are minors, 10 penalties in an 80-game season is pretty darn good. That's well above average. So if he can get back to that point and contribute a ton on the power play, I think we see the shooting numbers go up. The interesting one will be face-off percentage for Eriksson Ek this year, because another bump means that he is into the 50% category. And if you look at his first full year in the NHL at 2017-2018, he was at 42% back there. Now, it wasn't a ton of opportunities, so obviously he was playing a lot lower in the lineup than he is now. But you just look at it, 42.6, then the next season, 45.7, 46.2, 47.1, 47.6, and then 49.4 this past season. It's improved incrementally, and I did find it interesting, and we alluded to this last week, the town hall that Bill Guerin had on KFan, where Guerin talked about, he cited face-off percentage specifically. And I know face-off percentage is not the end-all be-all. It matters when you get your face caved in the face-off circle, but if you win a game and you get just torched in the face-off circle, it doesn't matter as much, because what matters is what happens after that. As we saw in the series against the Dallas Stars, if you lose the face-off on special teams, if you don't give up a goal immediately after losing the face-off, then it's not as big of an issue. But if you give up a goal immediately after losing a face-off, that's a problem. And so face-offs are kind of when bad things happen afterwards, then it's a problem. But this team has really never over the last few seasons been really good in the face-off circle. They have found ways to win games without controlling the draws. And so if he continues to just improve a little bit every season, he'll end up being a mid-50s face-off guy over the next few seasons. And so if we get improvement there and improvement in all the other areas, I think he's going to end up being a top 5 in the Selke voting within the next couple seasons, if he just continues to climb that ladder, climb that top of the roller coaster, which I have no reason to suspect that he won't. Now, what do we need from Joel Eriksson Ek this season? What do we need him to do? What are expectations for Eriksson Ek as this season unfolds? We'll discuss as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Once again, for the everydayers, make sure you check out our bonus episode with Jesse Pierce as we talk about some things that are still concerning heading into the start of the season. So what do we need from Joel Eriksson Ek? Well, we need him to just continue to be a bulldog, a bully, a pest out there. How many times have we heard opponents say that it's just not comfortable to play against Joel Eriksson Ek when they're out there on the ice? You hear it a lot. You hear opponents say it quite often. And it's something that speaks to the work ethic that he has, and just, I think, the amount of in-game intensity that you see from him while he's out there, whether it be working along the boards or just hounding somebody that has the puck and just trying to prevent them from even getting shots on the net. He is a huge factor in what this team does defensively out there on the ice. This is no more evident than his impact on the penalty kill. And so, special teams wise, be the force in the middle is another huge key for Eriksson Ek. Just on the penalty kill, just continue to be that huge dominant presence out there that can help this unit go from being top 10 this past season to working their way into the top 10 to maybe even top 5, somewhere in that capacity. So continued improvement there on the power play, just continuing to be that net front presence. We saw when he wasn't in the lineup down the stretch, just how big of a void that was for the Wild in the postseason and even the few games leading up to the postseason. The void that he left by not being able to be that guy in that spot. So you can build around that on special teams, but just make sure that he is a huge focus of what that unit does and is helping with the success, trying to get that unit back from like 15th all the way back up the lineup to 10th, 8th, somewhere in that range as well. Now, being the center on the second line, which is, I think, the spot that we'll see him for most of the season, depending on injuries and depending on whatever else happens, just to be the anchor on that line and to help Matt Boldy and Marcus Johansson to keep that unit as a cohesive and dangerous unit for this team so that they can take pressure off Kirill Kaprizov in the nights in which there are going to be first lines for opponents that try to really slow them down. You can't have, as we heard from Jesse, you can't have instances in which that top line gets shut down and then nobody does anything else. That second line has to be able to answer the bell when those guys are not able to be the ones leading the charge on offense. And then the final expectation for Joel Eriksson Ek this year is if he does end up getting the second A, which I think he's a strong candidate to do so, if he ends up getting that second A, be a leader out there. Now, he's not the most vocal player, but continue to be somebody that Matt Boldy can look up to, that any of the young players can look up to for the work ethic that he has. Guy is just a freak off the ice. His preparation for games is second to none. And so be a leader that the younger players on this team can follow and can try to emulate. It's no surprise that the Wild in the draft tried to go get centers that have a little bit closer of a profile to what Joel Eriksson Ek does. It's a skill set that a lot of teams would like to be able to try to replicate. So do that and prosper. And that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure to subscribe if you have not already so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the course of the week. We've got new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.